That night I saw something. That night I saw something I thought I would never see again. My own shadow walking without me down a hallway I could have sworn didn't exist an hour before. I'm 32 now, working a comfortable office job in the city, driving a sensible sedan, paying a mortgage on a house in the suburbs. My life is normal, predictable, safe. But 15 years ago, I was a sophomore at Westridge High, and I thought I understood how the world worked. I thought rules were just things adults made up to control us, to keep us in line, to make their jobs easier. Looking back, I realize how wrong I was. Some rules exist for reasons we're better off not knowing. Some rules are written in blood, and bad decisions carved into the foundations of buildings that should never have been built. Some rules are all that stand between us and something hungry. It was the fall of 2010. The leaves were turning that burnt orange color they get right before they die and fall. I remember because I spent a lot of time staring out windows that semester, trying to avoid what was happening inside the school, trying to make sense of things that shouldn't make sense. My mom had just started working double shifts at the hospital. My dad had left 2 years before that. I was angry at everything and everyone, wearing that anger like armor, thinking it made me strong. Now, I know it just made me visible to the wrong things. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday during lunch period, around 12:30 p.m. I was cutting through the old wing, the part of the school they'd built in the 1950s and mostly abandoned when they added the new building in 1985. Most students avoided it. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, buzzing like dying insects. It always smelled like wet concrete and something else, something sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in a closed room. I was taking a shortcut to avoid Derek Chin and his friends. They'd been on my case all week about something stupid I'd said in English class, some comment about the scarlet letter that apparently made me a target. As I turned the corner near the old science labs, past the peeling, authorized personnel only signs that nobody enforced anymore, I saw a girl standing at the end of the hallway. She was facing the wall, completely still, her forehead pressed against the faded green paint. Her school uniform looked old-fashioned, the kind they wore in yearbooks from the 70s, with the pleated skirt that went below the knee and the white blouse with the embroidered school crest we didn't use anymore. Her hair was long and dark, hanging straight down her back. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing weird in the empty hallway. "You okay?" She didn't move, didn't even twitch, didn't give any sign she'd heard me at all. I took a few steps closer, my sneakers squeaking on the old linoleum, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop and my skin go cold. The girl had no shadow. The afternoon light from the tall windows was hitting her directly, creating sharp, clear shadows from the door frames, the lockers, even the dust motes in the air. But the floor beneath her was empty, just smooth, shadowless tile where her darkness should have been. I stopped walking. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen, locked in place by something I didn't understand. The girl's head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something. Then, slowly, she began to turn toward me. I blinked, and she was gone. Just gone. Not running away, not ducking into a classroom, simply erased from existence like she'd never been there at all. But I could still smell that sweet wrong flower scent hanging in the air. I ran, sprinted back to the main building, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, too many horror movies. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real, and that terrified me more than anything. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I'd just sound crazy, and I had enough problems without adding seeing ghosts to my reputation. But the next day in homeroom, I met someone who changed everything. Her name was Maya Rodriguez, and she'd just transferred from Lincoln High, across town. Some rumor said her old school had been shut down for a week due to structural issues, but nobody seemed to know the details. She sat next to me in Mr. Patterson's history class, and I noticed she kept a small notebook covered in strange symbols, not doodles, but careful, deliberate markings that looked almost like a map or a diagram. When she caught me looking, she didn't get defensive or embarrassed like most people would. She just smiled, this knowing smile that made me feel like she could see right through me. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she whispered, leaning closer. Her voice was barely audible under Mr. Patterson's lecture about the Cold War. I felt my face go hot, that prickly feeling when you've been caught doing something you shouldn't. "What are you talking about?" "In the old wing. Something that shouldn't be there." Her dark eyes were serious, knowing, and there was something else in them, recognition, like she'd been exactly where I was now. "I can see it on your face. You've got that look, like you've seen behind the curtain and now you can't unsee it. Like you're carrying a secret that's too heavy and too strange to put down." I stared at her, my mouth dry. "How do you?" "Because I have the same look," she said, simply. "And because there are more of us than you'd think. Kids who've seen things, kids who know the schools we go to aren't as normal as everyone pretends they are." That's how I met Maya, and through her, that afternoon after school, I learned about the 7 rules. The archivist, that's what Maya called him, like it was an official title, was a senior named Thomas Webb. He spent all his free time in the library's basement archive, a musty room filled with old yearbooks, newspapers, and school records dating back to 1952, when the old wing had first been built. Thomas had wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked, ink-stained fingers from handling old documents, and he barely looked up when Maya brought me down there after school. He was hunched over a massive book, something that looked like it might have been a ledger from decades ago. "Another one," he said, not a question, just a flat statement of fact. He pushed a yellowed piece of paper across the table toward me, never taking his eyes off his book. "Read this. All of it. Don't skip any words." It was a list, typed on an old typewriter with keys that had struck unevenly, leaving some letters darker than others. "The 7 rules of room 237. 1. Never enter room 237 after sunset. 2. If you hear someone calling your name from inside, do not answer. 3. If you see your reflection moving independently in the classroom windows, close your eyes and count to 7. 4. Never be the last person to leave the old wing. 5. If the clock in room 237 runs backwards, leave immediately. 6. Do not follow anyone who casts no shadow. 7. If you break a rule, you must return to room 237 before midnight and apologize to the empty classroom. At the bottom, in faded handwriting, Someone had written, "These rules were established 1952. They are not suggestions. They are survival." I looked up at Thomas, then at Maya. This is a joke, right? Some kind of urban legend thing. Room 237 doesn't exist, I continued, trying to sound confident, even though my hands were shaking slightly as I held the paper. There's no such room in the old wing. I've been through there dozens of times. Not anymore, Thomas replied, finally meeting my eyes. His gaze was intense, almost fevered. They sealed it up in 1973, after what happened to Mr. Holloway, after the incident that made the national news for exactly 3 days before the story just disappeared, scrubbed, gone. Maya sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell her lavender shampoo. A teacher disappeared, just vanished from his classroom during 6th period, October 17th, 1973. 23 students watched him turn toward the blackboard to write an equation. When he turned back around, he wasn't Mr. Holloway anymore. He was wearing Mr. Holloway's clothes, had his face, his voice, his mannerisms, but his shadow was all wrong, twisted, moving, like it was underwater, like it had its own ideas about which way was up. The students ran, Thomas continued, pulling out a newspaper clipping from 1973, the paper so old it was almost transparent. Stampeded out of the classroom, trampling each other, screaming. By the time the principal came, by the time any adults arrived, the thing that looked like Mr. Holloway was gone. Just an empty classroom with all the desks in perfect rows and a half-finished equation on the board. They found his real body 3 days later in the space between the walls, right where room 237 used to be. He'd been there the whole time, trapped, still alive somehow, whispering the same thing over and over. "It's wearing my face." I felt cold, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads outward. That's insane. That can't be real. "Check the records," Thomas said, sliding a yearbook across to me. 1973, Mr. Gerald Holloway, science teacher. He's in the staff photo from September. He's not in any records after October. No death certificate filed until 1976. No obituary. No funeral announcement. Just erased. I should have walked away. Should have laughed it off as some elaborate prank, some story they told to scare new students. But I'd seen the shadowless girl, and now, looking back, I realize I'd seen other things too. Small things I'd dismissed as imagination or tricks of the light. The classroom door near the old cafeteria that was always warm to the touch, like something with a fever was pressing against it from the other side, the way certain hallways made my ears pop, like I was changing elevation even though the floor was level. The student I'd passed every day for weeks on the way to 3rd period, always in the same spot, who never seemed to age, wearing the same clothes, same expression, same books clutched to his chest. Now, I know those were warnings. Back then, I thought I was just being paranoid, seeing patterns where there were none. Over the next week, Maya taught me how to spot the signs, how to read the building like a text, written in a language most people had forgotten or never learned. "The old wing is thin," she explained as we walked its corridors after school one Thursday, her voice low even though we were alone. "The barrier between what is and what was, between our world and something else. Sometimes things slip through the cracks or slip back." History doesn't stay buried here. It circulates, like air in a closed system. We weren't alone in our investigation. There was a whole network of students who knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know exactly what. Jamie Park, a junior with a camera constantly hanging around his neck, documented every anomaly he could find. He had hundreds of photos organized in binders, doors that appeared in different places day to day, shadows that didn't match their casters, figures in windows of classrooms that were supposed to be empty. Postman's daughter, Sarah, everyone called her that because her dad delivered mail to the school, and she'd grown up running through these halls. She'd been tracking the patterns for months, keeping detailed logs of disappearances, absences that didn't add up, students who transferred out suddenly without explanation. And there was Marcus, the night janitor's son, who had access to the building after hours and had seen things even we couldn't believe, things he wouldn't talk about unless we were in the library basement with the door locked and Thomas standing guard. I saw them walking, Marcus told us one evening, his voice tight and controlled, like he was trying very hard not to fall apart. All of them. 3 a.m, I was helping my dad clean the old wing, and I saw them. A line of people walking down the main corridor. Students, teachers, people in clothes from different decades. Dozens of them, and they were all walking in perfect sync, like a parade, heading toward the place where room 237 used to be. Their feet didn't make any sound, and when I tried to follow them, tried to see where they were going, they just walked through the wall, dissolved into it like smoke. But the more we learned, the more questions multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Why 7 rules specifically? Why had the girl I'd seen been wearing a 70s uniform? What was special about room 237? And most importantly, what was the building trying to tell us? Because that's what it felt like. Not random hauntings, not just ghosts. It felt like the building itself was trying to communicate something, to warn us or lure us or both. The first failure came when Jamie broke Rule 4. He'd stayed late photographing the old science lab, trying to capture this weird shimmer he'd noticed in the air near the old fume hoods. He lost track of time, got absorbed in his work the way photographers do, and found himself alone in the old wing at 7 p.m. He ran for the exit, but the hallways kept changing, stretching. Doors he knew led outside opened onto more hallways. Windows showed night sky, even though the sun had only just set. Staircases led to floors that shouldn't exist. By the time he found a door that actually led out, his watch read 11:47 p.m. 4 hours and 47 minutes had passed, but he swore, insisted, would stake his life on the fact that only 20 minutes had gone by, maybe 30 at most. I saw them, he told us the next day, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee from the cafeteria. All of them. Everyone who ever got lost in there, everyone who broke the rules or got unlucky or just wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The images on his camera showed figures in the hallway behind him, caught in the background of his photographs. Students from different decades, teachers in outdated clothes, all facing the same direction, all walking toward where room 237 used to be. And in the very last photo, there was something else, a dark shape, taller than a person, with too many limbs, standing at the end of the corridor, watching. We started doing research in earnest then, spending every free period in the library basement with Thomas, going through decades of records. We found patterns, Students who disappeared were usually the ones who spent time in the old wing. Teachers who left suddenly often had classrooms in that section. There were spikes in absences every October, like clockwork, and there were stories, whispered stories, that predated even the 1973 incident about the land the school was built on. It was a hospital before, Sarah told us, showing us property records from the 1940s. A sanatorium for tuberculosis patients, opened in 1923, closed in 1948 when antibiotics made it obsolete. 214 people died there. They buried them in a cemetery on the grounds, but when they built the school, they moved the cemetery, officially. But there are old maps that show the cemetery extended farther than the official records claimed, right under where the old wing stands now. Thomas found something else, a maintenance report from 1965, buried in a box of miscellaneous documents that mentioned structural anomalies in the foundation and unusual acoustic properties, suggesting empty spaces beneath the building. The report recommended a full structural survey. That survey was never done, or if it was, the results were never filed. We were getting closer to something. I could feel it, this building pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm. Maya felt it too. We'd started having the same dreams, walking through endless hallways that twisted and folded back on themselves, searching for a door that was always just out of reach, hearing our names called by voices we almost recognized. Then came the night of the false alarm. The fire alarm went off at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, forcing everyone out of the building. I wasn't in school, it wasn't a dorm, but Marcus was there with his father doing overnight maintenance. He called me at 2:30 a.m., waking me from one of those twisted hallway dreams. It wasn't a drill, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I saw what set it off. The old wing, there was fire coming from inside, but when the firefighters got there, there was nothing, no fire, no smoke, no heat. But I saw it, Ethan. I saw flames behind the windows of the old science rooms, flames that were blue and cold-looking, and there were faces in the flames. So many faces. Everything changed when Maya found the original blueprints. She'd been searching through Thomas's archives, going through box after box of building plans and renovation proposals, when she discovered something impossible tucked between the pages of a 1985 renovation plan. Look at this, she said, spreading the architectural drawings across the library table, her hands trembling with excitement or fear or both. 1952 blueprint shows, room 237 here, in the old wing, northeast corner, third floor. 1973 blueprint shows it gone, that whole section of the floor plan marked as sealed with no explanation, but the 1985 renovation plans show something else entirely. Look at the room numbers, look at the dimensions. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of the technical drawings, the lines and measurements and architectural symbols there, hidden in the overlap between old and new construction, was a room marked with a different number, room 341, in the new building, in the section we used every single day. And when I traced the measurements, compared the position to the old blueprint, I felt my blood turn to ice. It was the same space, the same exact dimensions, the same position relative to the building's foundation. They hadn't sealed room 237. They'd just built around it, incorporated it into the new wing, and changed the number. They didn't seal it, Thomas breathed, his finger tracing the connection between old and new blueprints. They just renumbered it, Change the layout so no one would notice it's the same space. Look here. These are low, bearing walls. They should have moved but didn't because they couldn't. The original structure of room 237 is still there underneath the renovation. They just built a new shell around it. My stomach dropped. What room is 341 now? Maya looked up, her face pale in the fluorescent light of the library basement. The guidance counselor's office. The room went silent. We all just stared at each other, the implications sinking in like stones dropping into still water. The guidance counselor's office, where every student had mandatory meetings twice a semester, where troubled kids went for counseling, where the people who were most vulnerable, most alone, most in need of help spent time behind closed doors. I thought back to my last visit 2 weeks ago. I'd gone in angry about a college application deadline I was going to miss, frustrated with my mom, frustrated with everything. Sitting across from Miss Holloway at her desk, that large mahogany desk that seemed too big for the room, talking about my future while she smiled and took notes in her leather-bound planner. Wait. The guidance counselor, I said slowly, my mouth going dry. What's her first name? Thomas pulled out a staff directory, flipping through until he found the right page. His finger stopped on a name, and I watched the color drain from his face like someone had opened a tap. Victoria Holloway, hired in August 1973, 40 years of perfect attendance, never sick, never absent, never takes vacation. And look at this. He pulled out a series of yearbooks, spreading them across the table. Staff photos from 1974, 1985, 1995, 2005, 2010. The same woman, the same face, the same smile, not aging, not changing, wearing different clothes, different hairstyles, but fundamentally identical, like someone had used the same photograph for 40 years. That's impossible, Sarah said, but her voice had no conviction. People age. People change. That can't be the same person. It's not, Maya said quietly. It's not a person at all. Now, I know what we were dealing with. Back then, we were just terrified teenagers who'd stumbled onto something that should have stayed buried, something that had been feeding on students for decades, using their trust and their vulnerability like an open door. Jamie started pulling up everything he could find on Victoria Holloway. Social media, nothing. Property records, nothing. Tax records, nothing. It was like she only existed within the walls of the school. No home address, no family, no life outside of room 341. And when we really dug, when Thomas went through old newspaper archives, we found something else. There had been a Victoria Holloway in 1973. She'd been a student, a senior. She'd disappeared the same week Mr. Holloway did. Her case got even less attention than his. Just a runaway teenager. Her parents told the police she'd been troubled. They weren't surprised. The investigation lasted less than a week. And then, 5 months later, the school hired a new guidance counselor. Same name, same face, starting a job that she'd never leave, that she'd hold perfectly for 40 years without anyone ever questioning why. We need to see the office, Maya said, after hours when it's empty. We need to see what's really in there. That's insane, I said, even though I knew we were going to do it. Breaking into the school. if we get caught. If we don't, Thomas interrupted, how many more students disappear? How many more people walk into room 341 looking for help and walk out as something else, or don't walk out at all? He was right, and we all knew it. We decided to use the rules against themselves. If you broke a rule, you had to return to room 237 before midnight and apologize. But if room 237 was now room 341, and room 341 was Ms. Holloway's office, then maybe, just maybe, we could get some answers, or at least confront what was hiding there, force it to acknowledge what it was doing. I volunteered to break Rule 2. On Thursday afternoon, I walked past the guidance office during my free period. The door was closed, but not locked. I could hear something inside, a low humming sound, like electrical equipment or machinery running, and then I heard it, my name, clear as day, coming from inside the office. Ethan, Ethan, come in. We need to talk about your future. It was Miss Holloway's voice, but wrong somehow. Too smooth, too perfect, like an audio recording. I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to open the door, to go inside, to answer. The pull was almost physical, like a hook in my chest, dragging me forward. But I remembered Rule 2. I didn't answer. I took my hand off the doorknob, stepped back, and walked away, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Behind me, I heard the door open, heard footsteps in the hallway, heard my name again, closer this time, more insistent. Ethan, where are you going? I called you. You heard me call you. I ran, sprinted down the hallway, and didn't look back until I was in the cafeteria with 300 other students. But I knew I'd done it. I'd broken the rule. According to the list, I now had until midnight to return to room 237 and apologize. We had our opening. We all met at 11:30 p.m. in the school parking lot. Marcus had gotten us in through the maintenance entrance, a side door his father sometimes left unlocked by accident. The new building felt different at night. Colder, yes, but also more alive somehow, like the darkness had awakened something that slept during the day. The hallways echoed with sounds that weren't quite footsteps, weren't quite voices. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, flickered more frequently. As we approached room 341, I noticed something that confirmed our theory and made my blood run cold. The door number was wrong, not 341. The paint had worn away in places, revealing older numbers beneath. 341 was painted over 288, which was painted over 237. The original number barely visible, but definitely there, like a scar that wouldn't heal. It's been here all along, Maya whispered, her camera ready, documenting everything. They just painted over it. Made everyone forget, but the room remembers, the space remembers. I knocked on the door, 3 deliberate strikes. I'm here to apologize. I broke Rule 2. I heard my name, and I didn't answer, and I'm here to make it right. The door swung open, not slowly or creakily like in a movie, but quickly, suddenly, like someone had been waiting right on the other side. The office looked different, older, like we'd stepped back in time. The walls were that institutional green from the 70s, not the warm beige they'd been painted recently. The furniture was different, older, that heavy wooden style from decades ago, and sitting at the desk. No longer bothering to hide behind the mask of normalcy was something wearing Ms. Holloway's face like a badly fitting costume. Finally, it said, with a smile that showed too many teeth, teeth that were too white and too sharp. Someone who can see, someone who can remember. Do you know how rare that is? How special? Its voice sounded like multiple people talking at once, all slightly out of sync, creating this horrible echo effect. The shadow it cast on the wall behind the desk was massive, writhing, nothing like a human shape. It looked like it had tentacles, or maybe wings, or maybe both, constantly shifting and reforming. What happened to the real Mr. Holloway? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Maya and Thomas were behind me, Jamie filming everything, Sarah holding a canister of what she'd said was salt water mixed with iron filings. Marcus stood by the door, ready to run or fight. I wasn't sure which. He saw too much. The thing said, standing up, and I could see now that it was tall, much taller than any person should be, its head nearly touching the ceiling. Tried to expose what the school was built on, tried to break the feeding cycle, tried to save people. So the building took him, ate him, digested him down into the foundations, where he could become part of the structure, part of the system. His consciousness is still here, you know, trapped in the walls, screaming, always screaming. And Victoria Holloway? Maya asked, her voice shaking but clear. The real one? The student who disappeared? The thing's smile widened. She made a deal. Wanted to be important, wanted to be powerful, wanted to never be ignored again. I gave her what she wanted. She became the interface, the face, the lure, and in exchange, she gets to exist forever, never aging, never dying, never leaving. She's still in here somewhere, part of me now. We've been together so long I can barely tell where she ends and I begin. The building feeds on you, Thomas said, and it wasn't a question. The students who disappear. You're not just haunting this place. You're part of its digestive system. The thing laughed, and it sounded like wind through empty corridors. Such a crude way to put it. I prefer to think of it as a symbiotic relationship. The building was hungry before I arrived, built on burial ground, consecrated by death. It was always going to be wrong. I just made it efficient, organized. I select the ones who won't be missed, the troubled ones, the ones who come to this office seeking help, and in return, the building gives me form, gives me purpose, gives me eternal existence. The girl with no shadow, I said, thinking of that first encounter that had started all of this. Jamie in the hallway, when time moved wrong. How many have you taken?